The concept of death has long been a fascination of humankind. This especially shows in regard to burials, rituals, and items associated with them. Historical archaeology is able to bring to light cultural views and attitudes towards death. By examining graves, their physical remains, and goods, it allows for an interpretation of the deceased, but also shows how the ones living regard death in the afterlife. Such an example being that of ancient Egypt, where mummification and grave goods were common. Examining body remains of mummies and grave goods relays information about how death was viewed to be not an immediate end. Rather, the process of preserving the body shows how immortality was achievable, especially in regard to the afterlife. Along with mummification, cultural items such as clothes, pots filled with food and drink, and amulets were placed to help guide the spirit to the afterlife. This goes beyond the deceased in that the material items indicate how the living perceive death.
The way you view yourself, do you want that to be reflected in your burial process?
I think for me, it's not a huge part of my experience with death, but I'm open to it.
When it comes to your coffin, headstone, and burial location, would you leave it up to your family and friends, or would you plan it yourself ahead?
My family, for sure. For me, I don't want to leave my idea or my image of who I think I am. To me, I would rather leave it up to my family and friends or the people that were around me that experienced me to judge who I was as a person as opposed to myself.
So beyond that, if you when you die, would there be any items you possess that you'd want to have buried with you?
No, I thought about that for a while. I thought there were some materialistic goods that I would want to have buried with me, but I think this is just a place of transition where we're going to experience more life after this life. So whatever I leave here is just going to be from this experience, and whatever I experience in the next life, then I'll have that.
Beyond death culturally, material items are used to portray an identity, self-identity, and ascribed identity. Material evidence shows how a reputation beyond death was held in high regard. For instance, the Fayum portraits from Egypt were made while people were still alive. These portraits were made to represent how one wanted to be remembered, such that one would want to be painted young rather than old. A specific example of material evidence is one of representation of identity through clothing. Clothing and associated accessories also show how one viewed oneself. But it is not the dead dressing themselves, for it is the responsibility of the living. As quoted by Mike Pearson, the dressing of the dead is always carried out by the living, and consequently the costume of the dead constitutes the mourner's reading or representation of the dead person's former self-representation through dress. It is through the body and material evidence associated with it that transforms it into an artifact of it itself. In a broader view, grave goods can be given as gifts from the mourners of the deceased. These items can reflect the individual's characteristics or achievements, though they may also serve a different purpose, and that the items may prevent the spirit from coming back to haunt the living. Examining archaeological remains of the dead gives a better understanding of cultural attitudes towards death, but it is also alongside these physical remains that we are able to better conclude a social idea of death.
Because it's just everything is being left on the earth. You know what I mean? When you die, you don't remain just in the ground. I feel like your spirit or your soul moves on to another place. So that's where, you know what I mean? You'll remember everything when you're at that phase. It's not going to be because you buried it with you. Otherwise, people would be trying to bury everything they could.